The city of New Avalon was a galaxy of fractured light, a sprawling testament to wealth and ambition glittering against the velvet dusk. Tonight, that galaxy converged on a single point, the ancient, Gothic spires of the Cathedral of St. Jude, a place where sins were whispered and, tonight, perhaps, consecrated. Black town cars, sleek as panthers, lined the cobblestone streets, disgorging men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in jewels that rivaled the city's glow. They were the elite, the powerful, the untouchable. They were the guests at the wedding of the year, a mafia union that would seal the city's fate. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of 1,000 white lilies and old, cold stone. Light from a dozen chandeliers caught the heavy gold leaf on the arches, casting an oppressive, almost suffocating, beauty. At the altar, awaiting his bride, stood the groom, Vincent Calvetti. He was 38 years old, the undisputed head of the Orion Syndicate, a man whose name was spoken in respectful hushes in boardrooms and fearful whispers in back alleys. He was known as the Gentleman of Blood, a title earned through a lethal combination of old-world charm and ruthless precision. His black tuxedo was immaculate. His posture relaxed, but his eyes, dark and intensely perceptive, swept the crowd, missing nothing. He was a king surveying his court, well aware of the serpents hidden among his subjects. Then the music swelled, a heavy organ fugue that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cathedral. The massive oak doors opened. She walked the aisle alone, Evelyn Hart, 27 years old, a vision in ivory lace that clung to her form. Her dark hair swept up to reveal the elegant line of her neck, but it was her face that held the room captive, a beauty that was not soft or yielding, but sharp, intelligent, and mysterious. Her eyes, a deep shade of stormy gray, seemed to hold a tempest back by sheer force of will. To the assembled guests, this was a masterpiece of diplomacy, the joining of two great, albeit shadowy, families, a political alliance to end a quiet war and consolidate power. They were all wrong. Evelyn Hart belonged to no mafia family. She did not move in these circles of velvet gloves and iron fists. She was a ghost, a phantom crafted by the Federal Bureau of Anomalous Crimes, the FBA. Her entire identity, from her childhood memories to her supposed distant relations, was a fiction written in a government file. The wedding was magnificent, but the atmosphere was a lie, beneath the opulence. A palpable tension vibrated, a heavy, suffocating weight. Every smile was calculated, every congratulatory murmur a potential threat. Destiny, or something far more malevolent, was stalking the aisle, hiding in the shadows of the confessionals, waiting. Inside Evelyn's mind, the mission parameters replayed with cold clarity. Phase 1, establish contact. Phase 2, infiltration. Phase 3, today secure the union. Marry Vincent Calvetti. Gain access to his inner sanctum, his home, his life. Plant the surveillance equipment. Find the ledgers, the proof, the leverage to dismantle the Orion Syndicate from its core. The directive was simple, brutal, an absolute destroy the Calvetti empire. But then, Vincent Calvetti turned. He did not just look at her. His gaze was not the possessive look of a boss acquiring an asset, nor the fond gaze of a lover. It was something more complex, more dangerous. It was a look of profound recognition, as if he were seeing not just the woman in the dress, but the storm she kept hidden in her eyes. And in that moment, something within Evelyn fractured. The man she was sent to destroy, the monster whose organization had ruined lives, the gentleman of blood, looked at her, and her heart, a carefully trained and disciplined muscle, betrayed her. It did not just beat, it stuttered, it leaped, a warmth she had not anticipated, a connection she was not prepared for, coiled in her stomach. She reached the altar. He took her hand. His skin was warm, his grip firm but not crushing. A current passed between them, electric and undeniable. "You're beautiful, Evelyn," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. for her ears alone. She could only nod, her throat suddenly dry. The mission, the file, the objective. It all seemed to blur, like watercolor in the rain. The vows were a hollow echo, words spoken into the vast, judging silence of the cathedral. They promised devotion, they swore allegiance. They committed to a forever that, for Evelyn, was meant to last only until the arrest. "You may kiss the bride." Vincent did not hesitate. He lifted her veil, his dark eyes searching hers, still looking for that answer to a question she did not understand. He lowered his head, and his lips met hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of sealing, a brand. It was the taste of expensive whiskey, of power, and of a loneliness that suddenly mirrored her own. For him, it was a vow. For her, it was the deepest, most profound betrayal of her life, not of him, but of her own mission. As she kissed him back, a single, clear thought cut through the fog she was in. Terrible, terrible danger, and not just from him. The story began in that precise moment. The instant two lies collided at the altar, they stood there, bound by law and holy word, a mafia king and the federal agent sent to ruin him. And as they turned to face the crowd, husband and wife, each of them knew, with chilling certainty, that the person standing beside them was hiding a secret that could get them both killed. The reception was a sea of sharks dressed in couture. Vincent Calvetti moved through the grand ballroom of his estate, a glass of untouched champagne in his hand. He smiled. He accepted congratulations. He nodded as his capos and their wives kissed his ring and then kissed his bride's hand. And he watched. He watched them. But mostly, he watched her. Evelyn, his wife. She was magnificent. She played the part to perfection, her laughter light but not frivolous, her poise unshakable. But her eyes, those stormy gray eyes he'd seen at the altar, never fully relaxed. They were a mirror. He knew that look. It was the look of a hunter, or the hunted. He raised his glass in a silent toast to his lieutenant, Rico, who was busy explaining some turf dispute. Vincent nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. It was on a night, 15 years ago, a damp warehouse, the smell of copper and rain, his younger brother, Leo, dead on the concrete. The betrayal had come from a woman Leo had trusted, a dancer who had smiled her way into his bed and then unlocked the door for his rivals. Since that day, Vincent had held one truth: women were a weakness, a gateway for enemies, and this marriage, this political arrangement was the biggest risk of all. Miles away, in her own head, Evelyn was also remembering the sterile chill of the FBA briefing room, the buzz of the fluorescent lights, and the face of Agent Cole, the man who had trained her, the man who had held her, the man whose heart she had broken when she chose the job over him. His face had been impassive as he laid out the mission. "This is not a romance. Heart," he'd said. His voice clipped. "This is an extraction. You are a tool. You will get in, you will plant the package, and you will give me the data to burn him to the ground. No complications. Understood." He was her commander now. The coldness in his eyes that day had been both a warning and a punishment. "Darling," Vincent's voice pulled her back. He was at her elbow. "A moment." The music swelled, a diversion. "I need some air," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of a slightly overwhelmed bride. "It's all a bit much." "Of course," he said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Do not get lost. This house has many rooms." It was a warning. She smiled back. "I will be fine." This was her window. She moved through the corridors, her heels silent on the plush runners. She avoided the few patrolling guards with an ease that came from years of training. Using the blind spots mapped from the FBA blueprints, she found the study. The door was unlocked, as intelligence had suggested it would be. The room was dark, masculine, smelling of aged whiskey, leather, and cigar smoke. It was the heart of his empire. She moved to the heavy mahogany desk, her primary objective: plant the transmitter behind the main power outlet. Her fingers fumbled for the tiny, paper-thin device hidden in the seam of her dress. Her hand froze. The drawer was slightly ajar. Not where the ledgers were supposed to be, but his personal drawer. Curiosity, a fatal flaw for a spy, made her look. Beneath a stack of linen paper, there was a single, heavy silver frame, face down. She turned it over. It was a photograph of a little girl, no older than 5, with a bright, gap-toothed smile and Vincent's unmistakable, piercing dark eyes. Isabella, his daughter, dead from a leukemia the Calvetti money could not cure. This was not in the file. The file contained his crimes, his movements, his associates. It did not contain his grief. A wave of unexpected, gut-wrenching empathy hit her. This was the man who ordered hits, who ran the city's underbelly, but he was also a man who hid a picture of his dead child in his desk. Her hand, the one holding the FBA transmitter, began to tremble. This was not the mission. The mission was against a monster, a headline, a target, not a man who mourned. She could not do it. Not now. She straightened the photo, closed the drawer, and fled the room, the device still burning against her skin. In a small, dark security room 2 floors below, Vincent Calvetti watched a small black and white monitor. He had seen her enter the study. He had seen her open the drawer. He had seen her find the photograph. His hand had hovered over the button that would summon his guards. But then, he watched her pause. He saw her shoulders, so poised all night, sag for just a second. He saw her touch the silver frame. And then, he watched her leave, having planted nothing, stolen nothing. He leaned back, a deep frown carving his brow. She was an anomaly. A spy would have planted the bug. A thief would have looked for cash. An assassin would have a weapon. She'd done none of those things. She'd simply looked. Instead of rage, he felt a sudden, sharp spike of curiosity. He did not give the order to have her followed. He just watched her image fade from the screen. The silence in the room heavy and absolute. Later, the last guest had gone. The mansion was silent. The grand master bedroom was lit only by the city lights filtering through the tall windows. Evelyn stood in a silk nightgown, her wedding dress a pool of ivory lace on the floor. He stood by the window, a black silk robe hanging open over his trousers. He turned to her. The air was thick with unspoken questions. "My associates were impressed by you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They are your family," she replied, her voice soft, guarded. "I hope to earn their respect." He walked toward her, a panther closing the distance. He stopped, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough for him to smell the scent of lilies on her skin. He did not touch her. "I am not a man who enjoys surprises." "Evelyn," he whispered, his eyes dark and intense, searching hers. "And you are a surprise." He raised a hand, and she tensed, but he only brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "You're in my house now," he said. "My world. There are no secrets here." "Oh, but there are," she thought, her heart hammering against her ribs. The air vibrated with a different kind of tension now. It was not just the lies. It was a raw, undeniable pull. He was the target. She was the agent. But in the shadows of the bedroom, they were just a man and a woman, balanced on the knife edge of a dangerous truth. He leaned in, his lips hovering over hers, a silent question. The lines blurred, duty and desire, hatred and fascination, all melted in the heat between them. It was a battle of wills, a silent interrogation fought with proximity and breath. When the first gray light of dawn crept into the room, Evelyn lay awake, her body a tapestry of conflicting sensations. Beside her, Vincent slept, his arm draped possessively over her waist. She had survived her wedding night, but she realized, with a cold, terrifying certainty, that she had just failed her mission in a far more profound way. She had crossed a line. The dispassionate agent was gone. The woman who had just slept with her target remained. The scent of old bourbon and grilled steak hung heavy in the air at the Gilded Ox, a steakhouse where deals were sealed in blood and ink. Vincent was laughing at something Rico had said, his head tilted back. Evelyn, seated beside him, nursed a glass of water. She'd been married for 3 weeks, and her unplanted transmitter felt like a shard of ice against her ribs. The first shot shattered the quiet. It came from the kitchen service door, a high-velocity crack that was not a champagne cork. Vincent's guards, 2 men at the door, moved, but they were too slow. A second shot took out the chandelier, plunging the private dining room into a chaos of screaming glass and shadow. Vincent moved instantly, pulling Evelyn down, his body covering hers, but the attacker was already in the room, a silhouette against the swinging door. Weapon raised, he was aiming at Vincent's exposed back. Evelyn's training took over. It was not a thought, it was a reflex. From beneath the table, she kicked the leg of the heavy silver ice bucket. It flew, striking the gunman's shins. He grunted, his aim thrown off. The third bullet screamed past Vincent's head, embedding itself in the plaster wall. In that 1-second opening, Vincent rolled, drawing the pistol he always carried at the small of his back. 2 shots, perfectly placed, thudded into the gunman's chest. The man collapsed. Silence flooded the room, broken only by the tinkle of the dying chandelier. Vincent pushed himself up, his breath hard. He looked at the dead man, then at the ice bucket, then at her. Evelyn was breathing heavily, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of combat. He offered her a hand, pulling her to her feet. His guards were finally securing the room. He did not say anything, but his grip on her hand was tight, his dark eyes searching hers with a new, raw intensity. It was not just curiosity anymore. It was a dawning, dangerous respect. Miles away, in the sterile, bright offices of the FBA, Agent Cole stared at a blank screen. 3 weeks, Mason, Mary snapped. 3 weeks and not a single byte of data. She's not just slow, she's compromised. Mason Reed stood at parade rest, his face a mask of cold professionalism. She was your best, sir. Maybe the target is harder than we anticipated. Cole slammed his mug down, coffee splashing onto the desk. Or maybe the target is not the only one she's in bed with. He hated the image that conjured, "You're in." The commissioner owed us a favor. Vincent's personal detail needed a replacement after that unfortunate shooting last night. You are now his new private bodyguard. Find the transmitter Hart was given. If it's not active, activate it. If it is, find out what is wrong with it and watch her. Watch her every move. Mason Reed, with his icy blue eyes and military-honed instincts, was inside the Calvetti mansion within 24 hours. He found the device not in a wall socket, but hidden deep within the lining of an antique jewelry box in Evelyn's walk-in closet. She had not planted it. She was keeping it. Mason's fingers were deft. He did not activate it. He opened the tiny casing, replaced the primary chip with a dummy one, and carefully resealed it. The dummy chip would feed the FBA a stream of corrupted, useless data static noise that looked like activity. His true employers, the ones who paid far more than the government, wanted the FBA deaf. Not blind, they wanted this war to continue. Vincent, meanwhile, used the assassination attempt as a bishop uses a pawn. He called a meeting. The air in his study, the one Evelyn had failed to bug, was thick with cigar smoke. "Someone in our house," Vincent said, his voice quiet, "left a door open." He looked at the faces of his capos. "It is time for a cleaning." Evelyn, sitting by the fire at his insistence, he had not let her out of his sight since the shooting listened. Cleaning was a sterile word for what he was ordering. He spoke of territories, of old allegiances, of men who had grown too comfortable. He was precise, emotionless, like a surgeon planning a complex, radical surgery. He was cutting the rot out of his own organization, and he was doing it with a frightening lack of malice. It was just business. The city bled for the next 2 days. Evelyn saw it not in person, but in the hushed phone calls. The men who entered the house with grim faces and left with bloody knuckles. The quiet disappearance of faces she had seen at her own wedding. She saw the man she had saved, the man whose picture of his daughter she had cried over. And she saw the monster. They were driving back from a restaurant, Mason at the wheel, when a black sedan slammed into their reinforced car, spinning them against a retaining wall. It was not FBA. It was a rival crew, the Crimson Ledger, smelling weakness after Vincent's purge. The firefight was brief and brutal. Mason was a terrifyingly efficient fighter, but Vincent was a force of nature, moving with a grace that belied his size. Evelyn was pinned behind the car, her ears ringing. When it was over, one of the attackers was still alive, gasping against the wall. Vincent walked over to him, reloading his pistol with a steady hand. The man sputtered, "Please, boss, they made me." Vincent did not speak. He simply raised the pistol and fired, the sound flat and final in the night air. Evelyn flinched, a small gasp escaping her. The smell of gunpowder and blood was suffocating. Vincent turned, his face a dark mask in the flickering streetlights. He saw her, pale and shaking, staring at the body. He walked to her, and she recoiled, half expecting that same coldness to be turned on her. Instead, he stopped, his gaze softening, the monster receded, and the man returned. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping a smudge of gunpowder soot from her cheek. His touch was rough, yet incredibly tender. "It is an ugly world, Evelyn," he said, his voice low, "but you are safe in it. I will keep you safe." He pulled her against him, shielding her from the view of the dead man, and led her back to the car. As she leaned into his solid warmth, her mind was a battlefield. She'd just seen him murder a man in cold blood. She had just felt him protect her with a tenderness she had never known. The sin was not loving a monster. The sin was starting to understand him. And a new, terrifying question began to form in her mind. Was the man she was sent to destroy truly the one who deserved to die? The grand ballroom of the new Avalon Museum of Art was a golden hive, buzzing with the city's philanthropic elite. A jazz quartet played a low, smoky tune from a dais. Evelyn was in a backless sapphire gown, a perfect vision of the Mafia King's wife. She smiled, but her heart was a block of ice. The order had come an hour ago, delivered by a waiter who was not a waiter. A tiny, clear glass vial, no bigger than her pinky finger, was nestled in her evening bag, the contents of fast-acting, untraceable toxin. The directive from Cole, delivered via encrypted text. He is purging his rivals. He's more dangerous than ever. End it tonight. She was preparing to do the impossible, to poison the man who had, just last night, fallen asleep with his head in her lap while she read. She secured 2 glasses of champagne from a passing tray, her hands perfectly steady, a testament to her training. "There you are." Vincent's voice was a warm presence at her back. He was not wearing the tuxedo of a gangster, but that of a statesman, his power an aura rather than a threat. He looked at her, and his eyes, for a moment, held none of the world's darkness. "I was feeling possessive," he murmured, his gaze tracing the line of her exposed back. "I wanted my wife." He reached into his pocket, not for a weapon, but for a small, velvet box. "This is not a gala gift," he said, opening it. It was not jewelry. It was a single ornate, antique skeleton key. Evelyn stared at it. "Vincent, what is this?" "My grandfather's. It opens the vault beneath the house." He took her hand, turning it over, and placed the key in her palm, closing her fingers around it. "Not the syndicate vault. My personal vault. It holds the family histories, Isabella's first drawings, the things that matter." He looked at her, his voice dropping. "It is a place only my wife is allowed to enter, my true wife." It was a key to his past, his heart, his trust. It was an abdication of the walls he had kept up for 15 years. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the metal, the sharp edges digging into her skin. He leaned in, his lips brushing her temple, and she could smell the clean scent of his skin beneath the expensive cologne. He was going to drink the champagne. She was going to kill him. "You make this world less frightening, Evelyn," he whispered. So low she almost missed it. That was it. That was the sound of her resolve shattering. He, the gentleman of blood, was afraid of the world, and she, his intended destroyer, was his comfort. Her hand, the one holding the champagne flute, began to tremble. I need to powder my nose," she stammered, a perfect, flustered socialite. He smiled, kissed her fingers. "Do not be long." She walked, not ran, to the marble-clad ladies' lounge. The room was empty. She locked herself in a stall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The vial was in her hand, the toilet bowl. No, too risky. It might not flush completely. She moved to the sink, the jazz music a faint, ironic beat from outside. She looked at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was a traitor. But who had she betrayed? With a sob she did not know she was holding, she twisted the cap off the vial and poured the clear, viscous liquid into the sink. She turned the gilded faucet, the water washing away her mission, her career, her entire former life. She did not see the tiny, dark lens, no bigger than a pinprick, expertly installed in the filigree of the wall sconce. In a discreetly parked surveillance van a block away, Mason Reed watched the low-resolution video feed. He saw the vial. He saw her face. He saw her pour the poison down the drain. He did not react. He simply picked up his secure phone and made the call. "She is 100% compromised," he said, his voice flat. She had the package and the opportunity. She just dumped the payload. The line was silent for a beat. Then, Cole's voice, devoid of all its former warmth, came through, cold as a morgue slab. "Phase Omega is authorized. The target is Calvetti. The asset is to be considered hostile. Bring him in, and if she gets in the way, triangulate and terminate." At that exact moment, in the study of his mansion, Vincent Calvetti was also on a call, his private investigator, a man who had been on retainer since the day the marriage was proposed, was reporting in. "Boss, it's a ghost town. The address in Ohio for her aunt. It's a laundromat. The high school records forged. The Social Security number issued 6 months ago. The woman you married. She does not exist." Vincent looked at the thick file on his desk, the one his political allies had given him, the one detailing the life of Evelyn Hart, a distant cousin of a clean family. It was a complete, intricate, and total fabrication. He hung up the phone, the silence of the room crushing him. When Evelyn returned, the gala was over, a pleasant blur. She felt free. She had made a choice. She was no longer Agent Hart. She was just Evelyn. She walked into their bedroom, unzipping her own gown. The room was dark. "Vincent," she called out, a flicker of unease. A single lamp clicked on, illuminating him. He was sitting in the large armchair by the window, not in his robe, but in a black shirt and trousers. He was not relaxed. He was preternaturally still. In his right hand, resting on his knee, was his pistol. In his left, fanned out, was the stack of papers that constituted her entire fake life. "They did a good job," he said. His voice was not angry. It was hollow, empty of all the warmth she had come to know. The school, the family, the aunt, very thorough. "Evil," she started, her blood turning to ice. He stood up, the gun never wavering, though it remained pointed at the floor. He took a step toward her. The lamp caught the glint of moisture in his eyes. He was not a mafia boss confronting an enemy. He was a man watching his world burn down for the second time. "Who are you?" he asked, the words raw, torn from his throat. The fury of a dawn she could have handled, the agony of a betrayed husband. She could not. The air in the bedroom was thick enough to crackle. The gun in Vincent's hand was an extension of his will, a cold piece of steel that separated his world from hers. Evelyn stood, a statue in sapphire silk, the scattered papers of her fake life like fallen leaves at her feet. She did not look at the gun. She looked at his eyes, and the agony she saw there gave her the courage to speak. "My name is Evelyn Hart," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "That part is true, but the rest, the family, the history, it was a fabrication." "Who?" he demanded. The word was a blade. She had to make a choice. The full truth, the FBA, the badge. The mission would mean her immediate death. A full lie was useless. She chose the only path left, a confession wrapped in a lie that was closer to the truth than anything she had ever said. A private intelligence group, hired by your rivals. It was a plausible lie. They wanted leverage, someone on the inside. They wanted to know your movements, your weaknesses. "To watch me," he said, his voice hollow. He stepped closer, the gun still heavy in his grip, pointed at the floor. And the wedding, our nights, was that just watching too? At first, she admitted, and the shame of it burned her. It was the mission, it was just a job. "And now," he pressed, his voice breaking, "what is it now? Evelyn, or whatever your name is." She met his gaze, and the tears she had held back for weeks finally fell. "Now it is the truth," she whispered. "I was sent to find a weakness, and I found one." She took a single, dangerous step toward him. "Mine. I fell in love with you. Vincent, that is the part they never trained me for. That is the part that is real." His face was a mask of stone. He wanted to believe her. The man who had been betrayed 15 years ago told him to pull the trigger. The man who had watched her save his life, the man who had seen her cry at his daughter's photo, was in turmoil. He did not know which was the greater deception, her life, or her confession of love. "You love me," he repeated, the words tasting like ash, "or you love the game." "I was ordered to kill you tonight," she blurted out, the words desperate. "At the gala, they gave me poison. I poured it down the drain." His eyes narrowed. That he had not known. He had seen her on his cameras in the study, but not in the ladies' lounge. It was a detail so specific, so dangerous. It rang with the sharp clarity of truth. He said nothing. The silence was his judgment. He lowered the gun, but not the mask. "Get dressed," he commanded, his voice once again the cold instrument of the dawn. She was not dragged to a cellar. She was escorted by Mason Reed to the furthest guest wing, to a room that was both luxurious and a fortress. The windows were reinforced. The door had a heavy lock. He imprisoned her in silk. Vincent's only order to his men was clear. "She is not to be touched. She is not to be spoken to. She is mine to deal with." It was a threat to them, but a protection for her. He was saving her from the very men who would tear her apart to please him. For 2 days, she was alone. The rain of the passing storm turned into a cold, steady downpour. On the third night, the lock clicked. Vincent stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the dim hall light. He was soaked, his dark hair plastered to his skull, his black shirt clinging to his frame. He looked like a man who had been walking in the storm, trying to wash away the world. He closed the door, plunging the room into darkness, lit only by the pale, watery glow of the city lights outside. He walked to the window, his back to her. "They are coming," he said, his voice rough. "The FBA, the ones who really sent you." Her blood ran cold. He knew. He had known all along. "Vincent." "You were the poison," he whispered, turning to face her. The anger was gone, burned away, leaving only a deep, profound exhaustion. "You were meant to be the end of me." He crossed the room. She stood, her body trembling, expecting the end. He stopped. So close she could feel the cold dampness of his clothes, smell the ozone and rain on his skin. He raised a hand. She flinched, but his fingers, rough and calloused, were surprisingly gentle. They traced the curve of her jaw, his thumb brushing away a tear she did not know had fallen. "Why?" he asked. Not why did you betray me, but why the unspoken question hung between them. Why him? Why her? "I told you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I saw you, the man you are when no one is watching, the man who keeps his daughter's picture." His control, held by a thread for days, finally snapped. His hand moved from her jaw to the back of her neck. tangling in her hair. His other arm circled her waist, pulling her against him with a desperate, crushing force. His forehead pressed against hers. They were breathing the same air, sharing the same desperate, trapped heartbeat. "If this is wrong," she breathed, her eyes locked on his, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders. "I do not want to be right." It was all the surrender he needed. His mouth crashed down on hers. It was not a kiss of love. It was a kiss of annihilation. It was raw, hungry, and desperate, a collision of two worlds. It was the taste of rain, whiskey, and regret. Her fingers clawed at his shoulders, holding on as the world dissolved. It was the heat of his skin through the damp cotton, the scrape of his stubble, the silent confession that they were both lost. It was a desperate, shared damnation, a pact sealed in the darkness. And then, just as quickly, he tore himself away. He stepped back, his chest heaving, his face a mask of conflict. He had his answer, and it had ruined him. Without a single word. He turned, walked out of the room, and the heavy sound of the bolt sliding home echoed in the silence. The next morning, the house was chaos. Not loud, but a low, efficient thrum of activity. From her window, Evelyn saw it. Men, not in suits, but in tactical gear, were loading crates into armored vans parked on the service road. They were moving with purpose, evacuating. Mason Reed unlocked her door. "We are moving. The boss's orders." "Moving where?" she asked, her mind racing. "He is clearing the board," Mason said, his face impassive. "Evacuating the underground operations. All of them." Evelyn froze. He was gutting his own empire. He was abandoning the infrastructure he had spent 20 years building. The FBA was coming, and he was running. But then, the truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. He was not running. He was sacrificing. He knew the FBA was coming for him because of her. He was destroying his foundation, not to save his syndicate, but to ensure that when the FBA finally kicked in the door, the only thing they would find was an empty room. He was doing it to save her from the fire he knew she had started. He was choosing her, his betrayer over his legacy. For the first time, the law and the crime, the mission and the heart were not in conflict. They were one and the same, and they were both bleeding. The warehouse was a trap. Operation Clean Sweep, the FBA's decisive strike, was meant to be a surgical capture. The intelligence, likely fed by Mason Reed, pointed to a secondary wedding celebration at a Calvetti-owned shipping depot by the river, a perfect, contained location. Mason led the primary assault team, his face set in a mask of professional calm. "Breach, breach, breach," he commanded. The heavy doors exploded inward, and the FBA agents flooded into a cavernous space. It was not a party, it was an ambush. Blinding floodlights snapped on from the rafters, illuminating the tactical teams caught on the open concrete floor. From catwalks above, heavy automatic fire erupted, a storm of lead that tore through the agents' formation. It was a perfect kill box. Evelyn was not with Vincent. She was Mason's prisoner, his leverage. He held her arm in a crushing grip, shoving her behind a stack of steel drums as the firefight began. "Stay down," he snarled, firing controlled bursts at the catwalks. But the FBA was being decimated. Evelyn watched, horrified, as men she had trained with were cut down. A young agent, barely 21, was hit in the thigh. He fell, exposed, his weapon skittering away. One of Vincent's men on the catwalk saw him, leveling a rifle for the final, executing shot. Evelyn's training overrode her paralysis. "No!" she screamed. She grabbed the fallen agent's sidearm from the floor, and her hand was rock steady. She rose from cover, aimed, and fired 2 precise shots. The gunman on the catwalk crumpled and fell. The young agent stared at her, stunned. "Tourniquet now high on the femoral artery," she yelled, her FBA command voice cutting through the chaos. Her voice, giving tactical orders, was broadcast over the agent's open comms, miles away, in the FBA command van. Agent Cole heard it. He heard the gunfire. He heard her save his man, and he made his choice. "All units, Cole's voice crackled through the radio, cold and final. Asset Hart is hostile. She is armed and engaging our forces. She is a primary target. Terminate on sight. The young agent she had just saved heard the order. His eyes widened in disbelief, then hardened. He began to raise his sidearm toward her. Before he could, the wall behind them exploded. A matte black armored vehicle, a custom-built machine, smashed through the concrete block wall, its headlights cutting through the smoke and cordite. The driver's door flew open. Vincent, he was bleeding from a graze on his temple, his eyes blazing with a fury she had never seen. "Evelyn now!" he roared. She was trapped. The FBA, her people, were now her executioners. Vincent, the target, was her savior. She ran, diving into the passenger seat as Vincent slammed the gas. Bullets pinged harmlessly off the armored glass. The vehicle tore through the back of the warehouse, smashing through a steel roll-top door and plunging into the darkness of a private tunnel. They burst out onto the highway, the city lights a fractured watercolor blur through the driving rain. The escape was not clean. Sirens erupted behind them. The FBA had anticipated the tunnel exit. "They're on us," she said, her voice tight. But it was not just the FBA. A black sedan, running without lights, slammed into their rear quarter panel, sending the armored truck slewing sideways. "Not FBA," Vincent grunted, fighting the wheel. "Crimson Ledger. They were waiting. The FBA just flushed the birds for them." The sedan pulled alongside, the window rolling down. A man with a short, heavy shotgun leaned out. Vincent swerved, but the blast was deafening. The reinforced glass spiderwebbed, but held. "Glove box," Vincent yelled. Evelyn ripped it open. A heavy, customized pistol sat on a stack of maps. She did not hesitate. This was her world now. She unbuckled, braced her feet against the dash, and lowered the window just enough for the barrel to clear. The rain and wind were a scream. The sedan pulled alongside again. She took a steadying breath, aligned her sights on the driver, and fired 3 times. The muzzle flash a brief, bright flower in the darkness. The sedan's driver slumped. The car veered sharply, clipped the median barrier, and flipped, cartwheeling into a shower of sparks and metal. Vincent did not speak. He wrenched the wheel, taking an unmapped exit into the derelict docklands, a maze of abandoned warehouses and container yards. He stopped in a dark alcove, hit a remote, and a section of corrugated steel wall rolled up, revealing a hidden garage. The door rolled shut, plunging them into silence, broken only by the sound of the rain drumming on the metal roof. "We're safe," she said, her adrenaline finally starting to fade. "Vincent." He was slumped against the steering wheel, his breathing ragged. "Vincent," she grabbed him. His face was pale, his skin clammy. He looked down at his side. His black shirt was soaked, not with rain, but with dark, arterial blood. "The wall," he gasped. "When we breached, shrapnel." The safe house was sparse, but functional. A cot, medical supplies, weapons. She tore his shirt open. A jagged piece of rebar, 3 inches long, was embedded deep in his side, just below his ribs. It was a miracle he had driven this far. "This is gonna hurt," and she said, her voice all business. "I have to get it out." He nodded, his jaw tight. "Whiskey. Left cabinet." She retrieved the bottle. She doused a Bowie knife in the clear liquid, then lit the rest with a lighter, sterilizing the blade in the blue flame. She poured the rest of the alcohol directly into the wound. He roared, a guttural sound of agony, but he did not move. "Bite down, Mug," she ordered, handing him the empty bottle. She worked quickly, her field medic training from a life she no longer had taking over. Her hands, covered in his blood, were perfectly steady. She cut, probed, and pulled, extracting the metal with a sickening tug. He passed out as she stitched the wound closed with what looked like fishing line. She cleaned him up, covering him with a rough wool blanket. He was burning with fever, his body shivering. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his hand lashing out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was like iron. His eyes, clouded with pain and fever, focused on her face, but he was not seeing her. "Isabella," he breathed, the name a broken, desperate whisper. "Isa, I'm sorry. I should have believed you." His eyes rolled back, and his hand went limp. Evelyn sat back, her bloody hands frozen. Isabella, not his daughter, his lost wife, the woman from the files who had died in a car accident years ago. He was not just a grieving father. He was a man haunted by a different betrayal, a ghost from the past that, she suddenly realized, looked terrifyingly like her. The air in the old villa was cold, even in the daytime. It smelled of dust, damp plaster, and the ghosts of a grandeur long since faded. This was the original Calvetti estate, a sprawling, Gothic mansion on the cliffs north of the city, abandoned for 2 decades. It was the perfect place to disappear. Evelyn had half carried, half dragged Vincent inside, following a map she'd found in the safe house. For 3 days, she was a nurse, not a spy. She cleaned and redressed his wound, which was raw and infected. She foraged for antibiotics in the ancient, moldering pantry, finding an unopened first aid kit. She cooled his fever with damp cloths, listening as he thrashed and murmured names she did not know. While he slept, she explored. The house was a tomb of memories, everything left as it was, covered in white sheets, in the master study, a room with a cracked marble fireplace. She found a locked desk. The key Vincent had given her, the one to his vault, did not fit, but her old FBA training did. She picked the lock with a hairpin in under 30 seconds. Inside, beneath a brittle, water-stained blotter, was a leather-bound journal and a stack of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. "My dearest Vincent," the first letter began. It was signed, Isabella. Evelyn's heart hammered. This was the first wife, the one he had whispered for in his fever. She was a journalist. Evelyn read, and the night deepened around her. The letters told a story, not of a simple romance, but of a dangerous dance. Isabella, an investigative reporter, had been doing a story on the Calvetti syndicate. She'd gotten close, too close, and like Evelyn, had fallen for the man behind the monster. The letters were filled with her conflict, her love for him, and her fear of his world. Then, the journals, the last entries were frantic. Isabella was investigating Vincent's rivals, the Crimson Ledger. She wrote of a man named Marco, her journalistic partner, her source. He was not her lover. But the Crimson Ledger had found out about her investigation. They'd framed Marco. They'd manufactured evidence, painting him as both a traitor to Vincent and as Isabella's secret lover. The last entry was a single, terrifying sentence. "Vincent knows. They told him Marco. He thinks God help me." Evelyn dropped the journal as if it were on fire. She understood. Vincent, in a blind, jealous rage, fed by the ultimate betrayal, had killed Marco, and Isabella had died soon after, in a car accident that was clearly no accident. He had eliminated the woman who had, in his eyes, broken him. A cold, paralyzing fear seized Evelyn. She had confessed to being a spy, a corporate spy, hired by rivals. He had spared her, even protected her. But he did not know the full truth. He did not know she was FBA, a federal agent, a trained state-sanctioned deceiver from the very beginning. If he ever found out, he would not see the woman who had poured out the poison. He would see Isabella. He would see the ultimate trap, and he would not hesitate. She went back to his room, and he was awake. The fever had broken. His dark eyes were clear, lucid, and fixed on her. He was weak, his face pale, but the intensity was back. "You read them," he said. It was not a question. He had seen the dust from the journal on her hands. She could not lie, not now. She simply nodded. "Isabella." He closed his eyes, a muscle in his jaw working. "I killed her," he whispered, not with his hands, but his rage, his paranoia. "I killed her because I listened to the wrong people, because I let the monster win." He looked at Evelyn, his gaze so raw it stripped her bare, just as you did. This was the moment, the knife edge, but the fear she felt was for him, not of him. "You did not kill me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You had the poison confirmed. You had the photos of my fake life. You had a gun in your hand. But you did not kill me." She walked to the bed, her movements slow, deliberate. She sat on the edge. "And I did not kill you. I had the poison. I had the order, but I did not." He watched her, his breath shallow. This was a different kind of intimacy, more terrifying than any he had known. It was the intimacy of mutual, assured destruction and the mutual refusal to pull the trigger. She reached out, her hand trembling, and laid it over his heart. His skin was warm. "We are both ghosts. Vincent, hiding in a house of ghosts." He covered her hand with his grip weak but desperate. "She was my past, Evelyn. And she was a lie, I was told." His eyes held hers. You are my present, and you are a lie, you told me." He took a ragged breath. "I find I prefer your version." In the quiet of the derelict mansion, with the wind howling outside and two worlds hunting them, they did not make love. They made a pact. They held on to each other, two survivors in a shipwreck of their own making, finding in their shared solitude and their mutual betrayals a desperate, undeniable truth. They were in love. As he finally fell into a true, healing sleep, his head resting against her, Evelyn held him, his life literally in her hands, and she made a silent promise. The FBA wanted a monster. The Crimson Ledger wanted a king. She just wanted the man. She would get him out. She would burn his world down, not with a badge, but with a match, and she would drag him and herself into the ashes to be reborn. Far away in the cold, bright FBA headquarters, Agent Cole looked at a satellite map, zeroing in on the abandoned Calvetti villa. Mason Reed stood beside him. "She's there," Mason said. "She's been stationary for 72 hours. He's with her." "She's not an agent anymore," Cole said, his voice flat. "She's bait, and she doesn't even know the trap is hers. Initiate the lure protocol. We let the Crimson Ledger know where to find them. Let the monsters eat the monsters. We'll just clean up what's left." The old shortwave radio, salvaged from the mansion's fallout shelter, crackled to life. Vincent was on his feet, his wound a deep, agonizing pull, but his strength had mostly returned. Evelyn was asleep on a cot, exhausted from days of nursing him. The voice was clipped, FBA coded. "Lure is set, confirming asset Hart is in custody. Repeat, we have the asset. Moving to extraction point, warehouse 7 by the river, awaiting handoff." Vincent's blood ran colder than the tomb-like air of the villa. It was a lie. She was here, asleep, but the FBA thought they had her, or they were saying they had her. A trap, not for him but for someone else. But if they were using her as bait, a cold fury seized him. They were announcing her capture. He grabbed the last of their weapons, a pistol and 2 full magazines, and looked back at her. Her face, so peaceful in sleep, was the only thing that had been real in months. He could not leave her, but he could not let them use her. He had to end this. He scribbled a note, "Stay, I will end this," and slipped out into the pre-dawn fog. Evelyn woke to the silence. The absence of his breathing in the room was a physical shock. She saw the note, the empty space where the radio had been, and she knew. She grabbed the radio. Warehouse 7, her heart stopped. It was not a random location. It was the FBA's designated final stage trap point, the place where high-value targets were taken for debriefing before they disappeared. Cole. He was moving. But Vincent thought he was rescuing her. She grabbed the keys to the rusted-out truck in the garage and tore down the cliffside road. Warehouse 7 was a concrete behemoth, slick with river damp. Vincent slipped in through a corroded side panel. It was not empty. It was an army. Men in the dark tactical gear of the Crimson Ledger were setting up intersecting fields of fire. And on a catwalk, directing them, was Mason Reed. At that moment, the main doors exploded inward. FBA teams flooded in, shouting, "FBA hands in the air!" It was a setup. Cole had betrayed everyone. The warehouse erupted, the Crimson Ledger, with superior positions, opened up on the FBA agents who were caught in the open. But the FBA was not the only target. Mason's men were also firing at a lone figure in the rafters, Vincent. It was a three-way war. Blood sprayed on the wet concrete. Men screamed and fell, their loyalties irrelevant, all just targets in a dark, bloody game. Evelyn arrived, skidding the truck to a halt. She ran into the chaos, her gun in her hand, a ghost in her own war. She saw Vincent, pinned down behind a rusted generator, firing in controlled bursts, his side bleeding again. She saw FBA agents, men she had shared coffee with, get cut down by gunfire from above. She fought her way toward him, moving with the lethal grace of her training. 2 shots here, a duck and roll there. She was almost to him when a hand grabbed her, yanking her back against a steel container, a pistol pressing hard under her jaw. "You?" Mason Reed snarled, his face a mask of rage. "You just could not die. Could you, Agent?" "Mason," she gasped. "It's a trap. Cole set us all up." "I know," he sneered, his cold eyes glittering. "I helped him. This was never about the FBA. Evelyn, this was a business transaction. The Crimson Ledger wanted the city. Cole wanted his promotion." He shoved the gun harder, cutting off her air. "The deal was simple. Cole feeds us the intel to wipe out Vincent's syndicate. We get the territory. Cole gets the collar and a medal for bringing down the Calvetti family. Everyone wins." You're Crimson Ledger," she choked out. "From the beginning," he said, "but my real bosses, they do not like complications, and you and Cole," he smiled, "are complications. He thinks he's outside, waiting to clean up, but he's just another loose end. After I finish you, then your lover." He was going to kill them all. He aimed the pistol at her head. "Evelyn!" Vincent roared, a pure, desperate sound from across the floor. It was the only opening she needed. She slammed her head back, breaking Mason's nose, and brought her own weapon up. They fired at the same instant. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded in her left shoulder. The force threw her back. She saw Mason, a look of surprise on his face, a dark hole in his chest. He crumpled to the ground. She collapsed, the world spinning. Vincent was there, sliding to a halt, his hands grabbing her, pulling her behind the generator. You're hit," he was saying, his voice frantic, ripping at her shirt to see the wound. It's Cole," she gasped, the blood wet and hot. "He's outside?" The gunfire had died down. The FBA was broken. The Crimson Ledger decimated. The smoke cleared. Agent Cole, flanked by 2 agents in pristine FBA windbreakers, stepped into the warehouse. He looked at the carnage, then at her, bleeding in Vincent's arms. "Well, heart," Cole said, his voice echoing in the vast, dead space. "This is a complication." He raised his service pistol. "Give him to me. It is the only way you walk out of here alive." Evelyn looked at the man she had once loved. Then she looked at the man she did. She coughed, a spray of blood. With her good hand, she reached into her boot, her fingers closing around the cold, smooth metal of her FBA badge. She pulled it out. She did not throw it. She let it drop from her bloody fingers, clattering onto the concrete floor. "I choose him," she whispered. Cole's face tightened. He took a step forward, his aim shifting from Vincent to her. "No," Vincent said, his voice a low growl. He looked at Cole, and for the first time, he smiled. It was a terrible, final smile. "You don't get her, and you don't get me." He pulled his hand from inside his jacket. He was not holding a gun. He was holding a small, black detonator. He had seen Mason's men wiring the charges when he first came in a final trap for the FBA. "Go to hell," Vincent said. He pressed the button. The world did not just turn white. It ceased to exist. The warehouse, the pier, the river's edge, all vanished in a single, deafening, annihilating blast. The shockwave rolled over the city, and in the files of the FBA and the ledgers of the Mafia, everyone involved was, in that instant, gone. 6 months, in the wake of the Warehouse 7 explosion, the world had reset. the FBA, facing a catastrophic operational failure and the deaths of multiple agents, including a high-ranking commander, was forced to close its case. The official report cited an unforeseen escalation between two warring mafia factions, the Orion Syndicate and the Crimson Ledger, resulting in their mutual annihilation. Agent Cole, the operations architect, was dishonorably discharged, his career buried in the same concrete rubble as his targets. The file on Vincent Calvetti was stamped deceased. The file on Agent Evelyn Hart was sealed, marked killed in action. The world had moved on, and in a small, fog-shrouded fishing town in Maine, the coffee was brewing. Eve and Vin's Cafe was a small, warm space on a cobblestone main street. It smelled of dark roast, old wood, and the faint, briny scent of the sea. It opened at 5 a.m, catering to the local fishermen, and closed by 2 p.m. Its proprietors were a quiet couple, known to the locals as Vin and Eve. He, the tall, dark-eyed man who moved with a pronounced, stiff-legged limp, managing the finances in the back. She, the beautiful, quiet woman with the sad eyes and the intricate, star-shaped scar that puckered the skin on her left shoulder, just above the collar of her shirt. The explosion had not been clean. Vincent impressing the detonator had also triggered the hidden tunnel exit behind the generator. He had thrown her, and himself, through the opening and into the cold river, a split second before the main charges leveled the building. They had been washed a mile downstream, emerging from the water as ghosts, bleeding and broken, but alive. Now, their life was a series of small, quiet rituals. The apartment above the cafe was simple. At 5:30 every morning, after starting the first brew, Evelyn would come back upstairs. Vincent would be sitting on the edge of the bed, his face tight with the effort of dressing. The shrapnel from the blast had embedded in his lower spine. He could walk, but it was a daily battle against pain and uncooperative nerves. "You're late," he would murmur, his voice still rough with sleep. "The fishermen were early," she would reply, picking up a simple navy blue necktie from the dresser. She would stand in front of him, and he would lift his chin. This was the ritual. Her fingers, no longer those of a spy or a nurse, but just hers, would deftly loop the silk, straighten the collar and pull the knot tight. It was a gesture of profound domesticity, an anchor. She, who had been sent to destroy him, now dressed him. He, who had commanded an empire, now leaned on her for this simple task. "It is good," he would say, his hand coming up to rest on her waist, his thumb brushing her side. "It is a tie, Vin," she would whisper, her hands resting on his shoulders, feeling the solid warmth of him. "It is everything," he would answer, and kiss her, not with the fire of their past, but with the deep, steady warmth of a shared future, a future they were stealing, one day at a time. The world thought they were dead. They read their own obituaries online, in the archives of the New Avalon Gazette. They had died in fire and water, and in a way, they had. The gentleman of blood was gone. Agent Hart was gone. All that was left was Eve, who baked muffins, and Vin, who could barely walk. They had chosen this life, this purgatory of peace. But the past was not a ghost. It was a shadow, and it stretched, even to Maine. One morning, as Evelyn was wiping down the counter, a fisherman left his newspaper behind. The headline, from a New Avalon paper, was small, but it screamed at her. Crimson Ledger rises, new boss unites fractured underworld. She stared at the grainy photo. It was a man she did not recognize, but the name. The name was one she had seen in Isabella's journal, a lieutenant. Her hand, holding the rag, went still. The scar on her shoulder, the one from Mason's bullet, began to ache. A phantom pain that was all too real. She knew, with the chilling certainty of a hunter, that a monster like the Ledger did not forget. They did not forgive. They would, eventually, look for the man who had crippled them. They would look for the man who had survived. She crumpled the newspaper, her knuckles white, and threw it into the trash. Vincent came out from the back, leaning heavily on his cane, a concession he hated but needed by the end of the day. He saw the look on her face, the familiar, haunted tension in her eyes. He did not need to ask. He simply walked to her, took the rag from her frozen hand, and replaced it with his own. "They can try," he said, his voice a low promise. "Let them come." She looked at him, the man who had survived a blast that should have killed him, the man who had given up an empire for her, his betrayer. She knew the storm was not over. This was not an ending. It was just a pause, a beautiful, borrowed, fragile moment of peace, and she would fight, kill, and die to protect it. The old stone church, abandoned on the high cliffs of the Maine coastline, was filled with the scent of sea salt and white roses. Hundreds of them, their perfume a stark contrast to the damp and decay. It was Evelyn's birthday, a year to the day since they had washed up on a riverbank, broken and reborn as ghosts. Vincent had found an old priest, a man with cataracts clouding his eyes, who asked no questions when cash was offered for a blessing of a union. He stood at the makeshift altar, his legs stiff, his cane leaning against the front pew. He wore a simple black suit. Evelyn walked toward him down the dusty aisle, not in ivory lace, but in a simple white linen dress she had bought at the town market. There were no guests. There was no music. This was not a performance. It was not a merger or a mission. It was a vow. "I found you," Vincent murmured as she reached him, his voice rough. He took her hand, the one without the scar, and began to slip a simple silver band onto her finger. "In all the lies, in all the blood, I found you." She was raising her hand to his heart, her lips parting to say her own vow, when the massive stained glass window behind the altar exploded inward. A rain of colored glass, depicting a forgotten saint, showered the altar. The heavy oak doors at the back of the church burst open. Men, silhouetted against the gray afternoon, flooded the aisle. They were not FBA. They wore the tactical black and deep red insignia of the Crimson Ledger. Nowhere left to run. Calvetti, to a voice amplified by a megaphone, boomed from the back. "The dead do not stay hidden long." Evelyn reacted instantly, her training a razor's edge. She grabbed Vincent, shoving him hard toward the sacristy, the small door behind the altar. "The tunnels? Vin, like we planned, run." He stumbled, his injured leg buckling, but he caught himself on the doorframe. He looked at the men advancing up the aisle, their weapons raised. He looked back at her, his wife, his betrayer, his entire world. He shook his head, a slow, final movement. "I am done running," he said, his voice a low growl that was more terrifying than the gunfire. He reached under his jacket and his hand returned, not with his cane, but with the heavy, custom pistol she knew he always carried. Evelyn's heart swelled. Seeing his resolve, she did not argue. She lifted the hem of her white dress, revealing the holster strapped to her thigh. She drew her own weapon. The church, a place of sanctuary, became a war zone. The air ripped apart. Gunfire roared, deafening in the stone enclosure, echoing like the wrath of God. Smoke and cordite filled the air, choking the scent of roses, the pristine white petals, scattered by the concussions, were trampled on the stone floor, mixing with the hot brass of spent cartridges. Vincent, despite his injury, was an immovable object. He used his cane to brace his left side, his right hand firing with the steady, lethal precision of a king defending his last square foot of territory. Evelyn was a ghost, a dancer of death, moving between the pews, using the ancient carved wood for cover, firing in double taps, her FBA training a horrifying, beautiful ballet. They fought their way back to each other, a magnetic pull, until they were back to back in the center aisle, a small island of desperate, defiant life in a sea of encroaching death. "They're too many," she yelled, reloading as she dropped to one knee. A high-velocity round came from the choir loft, a sniper he had not seen. "Evelyn!" Vincent roared, seeing the red dot a fraction of a second too late. The bullet tore through the flesh of her right shoulder, the one that had not been scarred. The impact spun her. A cry of pain ripped from her throat. Her gun clattered on the stone. Vincent was on her in an instant. He grabbed her, dragging her bodily behind a massive, fluted marble pillar, the stone chipping and spitting dust as a hail of bullets hammered their new cover. He pressed her against the cold stone, his body shielding hers. Her face was pale, slick with sweat, the white linen of her dress blooming with a dark, terrible red. "You're hit," he breathed, his voice frantic, his eyes wild with a fear she had never seen, not even in the warehouse. She gasped, the pain a white-hot fire. But she grabbed the lapels of his suit. She hauled him down to her level, their faces inches apart, the world ending around them. "If we die," she panted, her voice raw, "we die, here, together. No more running." He looked at her. This impossible woman, his agent, his wife, the gunfire was a deafening symphony. He saw the truth in her eyes. This was the only end that made sense. He crushed his mouth to hers. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a kiss of annihilation. It was the taste of gunpowder, of blood, of salt, and of a love so profound it was willing to burn down the world. It was all the vows they had missed, all the words they had not said, compressed into one desperate, final brand. Together, he vowed, his forehead pressing against hers. His hand slipped from her. Moving beneath his jacket, she saw what he was holding. A small, black detonator, identical to the one from the warehouse. He had wired this church, this final sanctuary, just in case the past ever found them. He had known this day would come. "They wanted this church," he whispered, his smile terrible and free. "They can have it, He offered the detonator to her. Evelyn, her left hand covering his, placed her bloody right hand on top of theirs, together as one. They pressed the button. The police chief of the small Maine town stood in the smoking rubble. The old cliffside church was gone, a crater of blackened stone. The fire had been so intense it had vaporized everything. They found no survivors, only the charred, unrecognizable remains of the attackers. The investigation was brief. An internal feud, a gas leak, a tragedy. But the chief, as he was leaving, saw something. On a single fused piece of the original altar, a slab of wood that had somehow been thrown clear, sat two simple silver rings, melted together, forever inseparable. The light in Tuscany was the color of old wine, warm and golden, filtering through the high windows of a small church. A young couple, tourists, sat in the front, admiring the frescoes. The wooden door at the back creaked open, and another couple entered. They were older, perhaps in their 40s. The man was tall and dark-haired, and he leaned heavily on a polished wooden cane as he walked. The woman, with dark hair and quiet eyes, had a faint, silvery scar that peeked above the collar of her simple dress. They moved to the side, lit 2 candles, and sat in the last pew, their hands finding each other. They both wore simple, matching silver rings. The man leaned his head against the woman's, and she closed her eyes, a picture of absolute, unassailable peace. Mafia Boss walked into his own wedding, only to realize the bride was an undercover agent. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts and where you are listening. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Story, and give this video a like. If you enjoyed this journey, please also support us by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by many more.